This is by far one of the most important lessons you can learn in your initial understanding of chess theory. Chess elements, in theory, are the principles that define very specific, important factors to consider while playing a game. They can be used to create distinct advantages and clear avenues towards a better position, strategical advantages, as well as a decisive material advantage over your opponent. The four elements of chess, listed by order of importance, are force, space, time, and pawn structure. So let's start with the most important element, force. Force is basically the size of your army. Think of a real war. If you had 10,000 soldiers all armed with swords, and your opponent has 50 soldiers all armed with slingshots, who would be more likely to win? Now this is an extremely unbalanced example, but the concept is sound. If one player has more force on the board, that player's likelihood of winning increases. Before I show you how to determine force, though, let me give you another simple example that I present to all the children I teach. Let's say we have two young boys. I'll name them Mike and Jeff. Now I hand Mike 10 tennis balls and Jeff 5. Draw a line on the floor and place a basket on the floor several feet away. Then I tell them to stand behind the line and toss as many balls as they can get into the basket. Who would be most likely to win? Invariably, my students always respond that Mike would because he has more balls. I then ask, does that mean he will win? And they always answer, no, Mike may not be a good shot. The exact same is true in chess. The player with the advantage is more likely to win, but only if he or she makes good use of that advantage. Here's how force is defined and determined in chess. Every piece is given a force value, that being a number that represents the strength or force of that piece. The 6 chess pieces are given the following points. A pawn is given 1 point, a bishop 3 points, a knight 3 points, a rook 5 points, a queen 9 points, and the king is given 3 1/2 points. This means that every game starts with a total of 42 1/2 points for each player. Now many people do not give the king a force value at all, or give the pieces different force values, but these are the values the grandmaster I studied under recommended, and the king should be given a value so you can calculate force in any given area when chunking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. These values should always be considered when exchanging pieces. You should avoid, without good reason that is, exchanging a higher valued piece for a lower valued piece. The goal when considering force is to reduce your opponent's force count more than your own whenever possible. So giving up a 3-point knight for a 5-point rook would be a good exchange. Giving up a 1-point pawn to get a 3-point bishop is a good exchange. Any exchange that takes more force than you lose is good. Losing more force than you gain is referred to as going down the exchange. It should also be noted that a force advantage of 2 or more points is considered winning. Now, over the course of your chess experience, you'll undoubtedly have a spectator at some point in time ask, who's winning? While an advantage of force is winning, I myself personally always respond, you never know until it's over. And then I grin. Because it's true. Even when you're up in force, you can lose the game. When two very strong players face off and one is down in force, the player that is down, however, will often resign, since the only chance they would have in winning would be an extremely brilliant maneuver or their opponent making a blunder, and you can never count on your opponent making a mistake. I will stress, however, as a very strong chess player once said to me, no game is ever won by resigning. It should also be noted that the general rule of thumb when up in force is to make as many even trades as possible, since reducing both sides equally after you have an advantage will make that advantage proportionally greater and greater as both sides are reduced in size. A small 2-point lead early in the game is not as decisive as the same 2-point lead at the game's end if most of the pieces are gone. From this moment forward, you should get into the habit of considering the force count every time you consider your game's plans and your moves. Doing so will improve your game dramatically. Space. Simply put, the element of space refers to the freedom of movement and the amount of available squares your pieces have. The freer your pieces are to move, the greater the likelihood that you will find better ways to use them. On the flip side, you should also strive to inhibit your opponent's pieces whenever possible. Just like with the element of force, having more space increases the probability you will find something to do with your pieces. A piece that cannot move is in essence off the board, has a reduced force value, and not at all an active factor in the game other than possibly in a defensive manner. Now, defense is important, but by eliminating a piece's offensive capabilities, you reduce its overall usefulness. A simple way of saying this is not to get in your own way. Time. The element of time is often misunderstood by players, even at a higher level. Believe it or not, despite the fact that chess is a turn-based game, it is actually possible to get more turns than your opponent. A turn in chess, when speaking of the element of time, is called a tempo. The way you gain or lose time is primarily moving a piece to the wrong square and later having to move it back along the original path it traveled in reverse. This can be accomplished by attacking a piece that is overextended and making it retreat. Should it retreat along its original path and stop on a square on that original path that it could have stopped on before, that player has lost a turn, since he or she could have gone to that square originally and not have had to waste a move going back to it. I believe most of you will see the massive advantage gaining more turns or tempos can mean in your game. Pawn structure. The element of pawn structure is very critical for a strong game of chess and should not be taken lightly. Pawn structure has been explained in the lessons on pawns in the movement section of Chess Coach.